Hello everybody and welcome back to this retelling of The Fury Part 2, The Storm. We are so close to the end that I can smell it. I can't really, that'd be grim. I imagine actually there's nothing in this book smells very good. But yeah, we're very close. We probably won't get there today, but I will do my best to get through it in the next 2 installments. Everyone has regrouped in this book. Brick ran away, Rilke chased him, and now Brick ran back to the others. Sorry, I am glowing. I've actually put up a curtain and it's still this bright. But Brick has come back. He ended up inside the Man in the Storm. He's kind of inside this storm that rages around him, getting sucked towards the middle. Rilke chased him in there. She's still trying to kill him because she thinks he's responsible for killing her and her brother. She's gone mad. And Daisy, Cal and the others are chasing the Man in the Storm, and they've realised that if they use their emotions to kind of fuel these angels, they can really blast out these powerful attacks. So they are kind of winning, and the Man in the Storm is retreating. He's moving up into the thermosphere. This is ridiculous. I'm so sorry. But maybe not inappropriate for a book that's about creatures that glow inside you. Hopefully it'll go away in a minute. Anyway, like I've said many times, you're not here to see my face. You're here for my beautiful voice. Okay, Cal, the thermosphere, 3:58 p.m. It rose like a rocket, trailing a plume of impossibly dark smoke. The air trembled in its wake. Cal darted to one side as part of the city fell past him, disintegrating as it went. There were buildings there, office blocks that crumbled as they rose, screaming faces visible inside. Cal tucked his arms in, burning up through the sky, seeing the world shrink. The horizon was bent into a curve, the sky growing dark, stars appearing even in the middle of the day. Howie flew up beside him. Daisy was there too, on the offensive again, her shouts impossibly loud and bright as they slammed into the body of the beast. Marcus was gone, smashed into the earth so hard that even his angel couldn't save him. Cal had felt the moment that the boy had died. Oh, he did die. Sorry, Marcus. A split second of agony, then nothing. Don't think it, he told himself. Don't let the emotions take over. Cal lashed out with his mind, bolts of energy searing their way up his throat, vanishing into the darkness. The storm was still rising, perfectly camouflaged against the emptiness of space. Only the flashes of fire inside his throat gave him away, looking like underwater explosions. Brick, Cal thought, knowing that the boy was trapped in there with Rilke. They both needed help. A tongue of black lightning cracked through the air beside Cal, detonating with enough force to set off a tuning fork ring in his ear. He rolled, shouting out at the same time, his cry ripping through the storm. It wasn't doing any good. Like firing slingshot pellets at a tank. They couldn't get past its armour. He had to get closer. "Howie!" he called out, seeing the other boy below him, suspended over the blue curve of the earth. He hadn't realised how high they'd come and suddenly panicked that he wouldn't be able to draw breath up here before remembering that he didn't need to. His guts churned in a sudden rush of vertigo and he had to look up to steady himself. He sensed Howie approach. "Yeah," the other boy said. "Can you distract it? I need to get up there." Cal pointed towards its mouth, so dark it looked like a hole in space. "I'll see what I can do," he replied, breaking away, leaving a trail of light behind him as he arced upwards. The beast reached out for him, but he was too quick, darting left and right to avoid the lightning. Something else was happening inside the storm, the turbine of its mouth turning once again. It made no noise in the vacuum of space, but Cal could feel its power as it started to reel him in. He didn't fight it this time, just tucked in his wings and let himself rise. Below, something strange was happening to the clouds, running across the surface of the planet like soapy water in the bath. A tunnel of vapour snaked up, jolting Cal as it funneled past. "What the?" was as far as he got before he understood that it was devouring the atmosphere, the air, the oxygen. "Stay calm, don't think about it." He put his head down, rising faster, slowing only when he heard Daisy's voice inside his head. "Cal!" He looked to see her there, her wings outstretched. It was as though she was made of burning magnesium, a flare so bright that even with his angel's eyes he had to look away. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I was wrong," she said. She stopped next to him and he risked looking again, feeling as if he was hovering next to the sun. Cal, we have to let go. The angels want us to use our emotions. It's the only way to make them strong enough. What? How do you know? I just do, she said. It's okay to be scared. No, she was wrong. Fear would only make him weak. He'd learned that over and over again in his martial arts classes. Stay focused, never get angry, never get scared, or you were guaranteed to lose. Center yourself. Let everything wash over you. Focus. And then strike. Bah! Wait here, he said. Look after Adam. He ignored her protests, blasting up until the spinning chasm of the man's mouth was overhead. From here it looked big enough to swallow the whole world. Those same flashes of fire erupted inside the smoky flesh of its throat, and flickers of sound kept breaking through the deafening weight of silence. Mind voices that might have belonged to Brick and Rilke. Cal was balanced on the lip of a whirlpool, and he clenched his teeth against the terror of it. He folded everything in, feeling himself sucked upwards so violently that he thought he'd left his stomach behind. He tumbled in the churning murk, smelling air and ocean in the vapour around him. The world beneath him shrank away, so small, so vulnerable in its bed of boundless night. Then it, too, vanished as the storm swallowed him. As soon as he was inside it, he thrust out his wings, turbulence making his head spin. It was like being inside a cave, only one made of roiling smoke. Chunks of earth and city spiralled around him in a silent dance, disintegrating as they collided. Everything here was moving towards a distant point, a speck of absolute darkness. She was right, he thought. It is a black hole. Between him and it, caught up in the flow of churning matter, was a flickering orb of fire that had to be Brick or Rilke, or both of them, he realised, seeing the two forms inside that thrashed and fought. "Brick!" he called out, sailing towards them. The wind blistered past his ears, trying to grab hold of him, and it was all he could do to resist. "Brick! Rilke! Help me!" Brick screamed. Jagged bolts of electricity were sparking from them, pumping out a cold, prickling energy that Cal could feel against his skin. He let himself slide closer and lost his grip, suddenly lurching towards the throat. The pull was just too strong. He couldn't hold himself here. If he got any nearer to them, he risked being ripped away. Brick would have to wait. Cal cried out. Here, beneath the armour of the storm, his attack was like a rocket-propelled grenade, sinking deep into the wall before erupting. He opened his mouth again, letting his angel speak, an onslaught of power that cut a path towards the event horizon ahead. Cal felt the storm shake, a sinking battleship, but the endless inward breath was as strong as ever. He felt himself caught up in it, his angel burning at full strength, but still unable to resist the pull. It wasn't enough. He wasn't enough. "You are, Cal," he heard Daisy say, a whisper in the middle of his brain, "but you have to use them. You have to be you." Use what? His emotions. He'd seen what that had done to Brick and to Rilke. It had driven them both mad. Even now he could see it in the way they scratched and bit and wrestled in the ether. Clear your mind. Focus. Strike. "Trust me, Cal." And he did, more than anything. He took a deep breath, then set it free. All the fear, all the misery, all the confusion, and all the fury, his fury. It ignited in his stomach, in his heart, in his head, a pure white fire that blazed out from his mouth. The air roared, a shaft of light punching out through the storm, cutting through the skin of cloud, through the tattered flesh. Cal screamed until he thought he would turn himself inside out. The emotion still boiled there, an infinite supply of it, a lifetime of it, giving him strength, giving his angel power. He opened his mouth and cried out again, the world around him igniting. Rilke, the thermosphere, 4:03 p.m. Rilke had to close her eyes against the sudden brightness of the explosions, but there was no sound, no thunder, just the pathetic cries of the burning boy. "Please, please, just let me go." Not that he was really burning anymore, just the thinnest shimmer covering his skin, and even that was flickering on and off like a candle in the wind. She held him before her, using the hands that weren't really hands. The world was nothing but smoke and shadow, no ground, no sky, just a tunnel of roiling darkness pockmarked by detonations. It was trying to pull them in, but her wings held them both in place. She was so tired and so confused that she couldn't remember if it had ever been different. Almost everything inside her was used up now, But that was okay. She only had one more job to do, then she could go home and be with her brother again. But the burning boy just would not die. She reached out with her knot hands, squeezing the boy's head. His fire blazed where she touched him, crackling and spitting. It was like a second skin, armoured. She couldn't get through it. But every doll could be broken. She swung him to the side, smashing him against a floating island of rock, breaking it into splinters. "Please, I'm not who you think I am," the boy screamed inside her head, his voice the buzzing of a blue bottle. So annoying. Why wouldn't he just stop? She pulled him back towards her, holding him there, studying the molten glow of his eyes. He held out a hand to her. "I didn't hurt him. It wasn't me." Maybe he wouldn't die because he was telling the truth. Could she break him if he was innocent? But Schiller had been innocent, and he had been broken. Everything was so confusing. She pictured her brother, his beautiful face, so like her own and yet so different. His blonde hair, those big round blue eyes, the wings of fire that had stretched from his back. Wait, that couldn't be right, could it? Her brother wasn't the boy with wings. She reached up with her hand, the one that had always been hers, feeling the hole in her head, the ache that pulsed there. How had she got it? Who had done this to her? She had a memory of a blazing figure, an angel with wings burning through her head with just a thought. The thing before her, the snivelling wreck, was nothing like that. What was she doing? Her last reserves of strength drained away. It was too much. All she wanted was to be with Schiller, back in the library at home, in the big bay window seat, drenched in sun, breathing in the heavy, dusty air. They'd always been safe there, safe from outsiders, safe from their mother, safe from the men. That was their space. It always would be. "Schiller," she said. She loosened the grip of her mind, the boy there already half forgotten, as he spun away. "I'm coming," she said. "Wait for me." She didn't know where to go, but surely if she just relaxed, then she'd get there. She folded in her wings, feeling the current of air wrap a cold hand around her, pulling her along. Isn't this what happened when you died? A tunnel, a light at the end. There was nothing at the end of this one, nothing she could see anyway, but she could sense death there, as real and as certain as anything she'd felt in her life. "Help me!" It was the burning boy again, floating alongside her, scrabbling at the air. She ignored him, smiling as she floated gently down the stream towards the end of it all, towards her brother, into the arms of death. Let it have her. She was done. Poor Rilke. This book is so sad. Daisy, the thermosphere, 4:07 p.m. Daisy let loose another shot from the cannon of her mouth, a missile fuelled by the emotions inside her. It needled into the man in the storm's face, erupting in the smoky flesh. There was almost nothing left of him now, just that gaping mouth, a hole in space that kept turning, gulping down everything it could. Cal was inside there somewhere, Brick and Rilke too. They were all still alive, she knew that much, but she couldn't tell whether they were winning or not. Silent explosions threw out webs of light that ebbed into the darkness, and tongues of fire were poking through the skin of cloud. She stared down at the big blue bowl of her planet. It had always seemed so big, so vast, such a long way to go to get anywhere. Now, though, she could stretch out her arms and hold it between them. It looked so fragile. "You can't have it," she screamed, turning back, opening her mouth and uttering another cry, one made up of rage. It erupted inside the storm, echoed by another 3 or 4 blasts from its throat. Cal. There was no sign of Howie, but she could hear him shouting. Adam was close, a speck of light hanging below her. She almost called out to him to ask if he was okay, before remembering that he couldn't answer her. No, not couldn't. Wouldn't. She paused, closing her mouth, remembering the day that Adam had arrived at Fursville. They'd been sitting around the table trying to make sense of what was going on, just a few days, a few million years ago. It had been Brick, that was it, going thump, 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 scaring the boy, and Adam had screamed, the sound of it tearing across the table, smashing glass, blowing out the candlelight. Fear had done that to him, the cry of his unhatched angel, the only sound he'd made in all the time they'd known him. "Adam," she called out, diving down to him. He looked so scared, his legs curled up to his chest, his face tucked into his folded arms. He reminded her of a little tortoise, but with a shell made from fire. Only his glowing wings were outstretched, holding him in orbit. They were huge and bright. She pulled him close with her mind, then wrapped her arms around him. The space between them crackled and sputtered, an invisible force trying to separate them. It was like trying to keep afloat underwater, but she held on. "I know you're scared," she said. "It's just me, Adam. It's Daisy. Look at me." He tilted his head up, those big, burning eyes never blinking. Daisy smiled at him, aching with the effort of holding him close. She wouldn't let go. "I know this is all crazy, but trust me. I'll look after you, Adam, always, I promise. Is that okay?" He nodded. Daisy glanced over her shoulder, seeing something forming in the chaos of the storm. "I know it's scary, but it's okay to be afraid. We all are. Me, Cal, the new boy, we're all frightened. I think we're meant to be." He frowned up at her, his own face like a ghost's beneath the skin of fire. "It's like..." She struggled, trying to think of the right words. "Like, you know when something really bad happens and you just want to scream, but you don't because you don't want to get told off? Do you know what I mean? Did your mum and dad ever tell you off for shouting and screaming?" He nodded, and she could see a picture there beamed from his head into hers. A tiny house packed with junk, not a scrap of floor visible beneath the mess. A living room full of nasty cigarette smoke and the smell of wine, but not the nice wine her mum and dad sometimes bought. This was something stronger, older. A bedroom, too, full of broken toys. There was no noise allowed here, she understood, even though the television was blaring from the other room, even though she could feel a hunger in her belly that wasn't really hers, even though she was cold and tired. To make a noise in here would bring him in, a man she couldn't see but who smelled just as old and rotten as the house. Better to stay quiet, to hold it in, to never cry. "Oh, Adam," she said, "were they really like that, your mum and dad? Were they really so horrid?" He squirmed away, as though embarrassed, but she held on to him, even though it felt as if the space between them was about to explode. Another memory. Adam crying in the dark after a nightmare, a figure slamming open the bedroom door, storming across the room, lashing out so hard that there were stars. She felt the pain as if it were her own, the blood in her mouth, the anger too. She felt the turmoil in her tummy. "He hit you," she said, incredulous. She had to shut it out. It was so awful. She felt Adam do the same, stuff it deep down where it couldn't hurt him. "No," she said, "don't run away from it. Use it. All that stuff down there, you need to get it out. It's like the bad bit in a peach, the rotten bit. If you cut it out, it's fine, but if you leave it there too long, it poisons the whole thing." She shook her head, trying to think of a better way of putting it. "You need to think about it all the anger and sadness and fear. Let it out, Adam, please. Just scream and scream and scream." Adam's mouth opened, and she could almost feel it bubbling up inside him. So many years of sadness and silence, a dam about to break. "That's it," she said. "I knew you could do it. I knew it." It was so nearly there, so nearly out of him. Adam's eyes widened, his face screwing into a mask of horror. Daisy looked up, seeing it too late, a guillotine of smoke that dropped right towards her. She reached out before she even knew what she was doing, opening the door in the world, pushing Adam through it. "You can do this, Adam, I love you." The air between them exploded like a bomb as they parted, an inferno of white light that sent her spinning out into space. Cal, the thermosphere, 4:13 p.m. Just like that, she was gone. Cal twisted around, looking back through the churning smoke. 1 minute Daisy had been there, the next she'd been wrapped in darkness, ripped away. He searched for her in his head, but he couldn't tell if it was her voice he heard or just the echo of it. "Daisy?" he called out. No reply. He beat his wings, pulling against the current, thrashing his way out of the storm. The air beside him erupted into ash, a figure appearing there. Adam flinched when he saw Cal, his wings spasming as he tried to control them. "What happened?" Cal said. The answer was in the little boy's face as he stared out into oblivion. She was gone. The rage inside Cal was white-hot, a supernova that burned in his core. He looked up at the storm, the man who sat fat in his bed of cloud, who gorged on the world. "She was just a girl, you bastard! She was just a girl!" The grief was too much, like it was burning him out from the inside. He looked at Adam, saw his eyes narrow with the same outrage. The little boy didn't know how to handle it, the fear, the anger, but his angel did. Cal could almost see the emotion there past the transparent haze of his skin. It was like nothing else in the world. No atoms spinning in their orbits, no electrical sparks, just a ball of light, brighter than the sun, rising up the boy's throat. "Do it," Cal said. "Please." Adam opened his mouth and screamed Daisy's name. It cut its way free from him like a flamethrower blasting out with a jet engine roar and bright enough that it leached all the colour from the world. The shockwave hit Cal like a hammer, sending him reeling. He spread his wings, seeing the boy's fire punch into the storm, slicing its way across the face of the beast. It seemed to go on forever. He could have no air left in his lungs, but still he screamed, an inferno that set the sky alight. Cal felt the cogs of his mind slip at the sight of it, the impossibility of it. It was too much. The angel inside him seemed to feed on the frenzy of his emotion, drawing it from his soul, pulling it up his throat. Cal choked on it, gagging as every single bad thing in his life was suddenly regurgitated. He thought of Daisy, always smiling, always brave, always ready to hug him with those stick-thin arms. Never again, though. She was gone. He howled at the storm, spewing out an inferno of light and flame, purging himself. The air shook with the power of it, the world beneath him groaning as the physics it rested upon began to fracture. Their voices blazed relentlessly, their fury without end, without mercy. Their fire was stripping the clouds away from the storm, revealing the pale ribbons of stretched flesh beneath. The engine of its mouth was stalling, spinning then stopping, spinning then stopping. Darkness washed from it, as though it was vomiting out the emptiness behind the universe. Still, Cal screamed, even though he felt as if he was drowning, even though his brain pleaded with him to stop. He didn't think he could, even if he wanted to. He felt like a ghost, like he no longer belonged inside the flesh and bone of his body. If he died now, it wouldn't matter, because his angel was here. It had slipped on his skin like an anorak. It had found a way to make itself real. The thought was terrifying, and his fear was just more fuel for the fire. It flared out between his lips, and he screamed and screamed and screamed. Daisy. Space. 4:19 p.m. This was her grave, and it was boundless. The fist of smoke wrapped itself around her the same way it had done back in the pit. Only this time it didn't pull her towards the man in the storm. It thumped her outwards, hurling her away from him, from the planet, from her friends. The coil of liquid night ate into her, spreading across her mouth and her face, smothering her, blinding her. Her angel was working at full strength, fighting it, but it couldn't last for much longer. She could feel its pain in every cell, its exhaustion. They would die together, in the cold, dark void of space. No, it was too horrible. She didn't want it all to end here, where there was no sunshine and no birds and no flowers. How would she find her mum and dad? She cried out, her voice muffled by the cushion of smoke against her face. She ripped at it with her fingers, tearing at the shroud, peeling it back in time to see a huge silver medallion in the sky ahead. It took her panicked mind a moment to understand that it was the moon, and a heartbeat later she hit it, punching through white rock. She detonated out again in a shower of debris, still not slowing. She felt like a fish hooked by a dark barb, being reeled out of the ocean. It was getting colder, and something was happening to her head, her vision flickering. The smoke wrapped itself around her, and it was as if death already had her. Everything so dark, so quiet, apart from the thrashing hum of her angel's heart. It was eating into her, dissolving her. When she tore at it again, there was no sign of the earth, no sign of anything other than the stars. "No!" she screamed. This time she thought she heard a reply somewhere deep down inside her. It was a voice she knew, but she had to wait for it to come again before she believed it. "Mum? Is that you?" It wasn't. How could it be? It was just a piece of her brain trying to keep her calm. She didn't care. It was so nice to see them, her mum and her dad, in the stuttering light of her imagination. Pain clawed up her back as the smoke continued to burrow into her, her fire ebbing. Once it was gone, she would have no more defence against the storm. At least it would be quick. She closed her eyes. Her parents were there and she smiled at them. It felt like so long. She took herself to them. Back to the day they'd had the picnic in the garden. Her mum had been too weak to go any distance, but she'd made it outside with their help, lying on the blanket in the shade of the next-door neighbour's trees. One of Mrs. Baird's cats had tried to run off with her dad's lunch while he was in the kitchen making tea. Daisy had chased it halfway back to the fence, picking up the chicken drumstick from the flower bed and dusting it off. "He'll never notice," she'd told her mum. He'd come back and taken a bite out of it, and she and her mum had rolled around on the floor like monkeys, giggling so hard she hadn't been able to breathe, especially when he'd pulled a clump of cat hair from between his teeth. Daisy laughed now. The hum of her angel heart grew louder, and she could feel the sudden roar of her fire as it flared up. It's laughing too, she realised. The sensation of it was like nothing she'd ever felt, like her whole body was made of sound. Even though she was surely too far away to find her way back, even though the smoke meant to bury her in the endless nothing of the universe, she was smiling. What else was there? The time they'd gone to a salmon farm in Scotland and her dad had tried to ride the aerial slide over the lake. He'd sat on the wrong bit and ended up waist deep in water, even though he'd spent the whole day telling her not to get wet. They'd had to send out a little boat to rescue him. She giggled, her tummy aching, the fire blazing as though she'd turned a gas hob to its highest setting. She didn't understand where they came from, these memories, but her head was suddenly full of them, each one brighter than the last. Her angel was like a child hearing music for the first time, blazing inside and out. Its own laughter pulsed from every pore, so alien and yet so utterly familiar too. It was a knot sound in her skull, a chime like bells. It chiselled against the smoke like a physical thing, splitting it, casting off squirming ribbons of night. "You're pathetic," she said, talking to the man in the storm, to the beast who raged in the sky so far behind her. It could eat all it wanted, but it could never win. Not really. How could it ever triumph when there was laughter in the world? "I'm not scared of you. You're a joke. A big, fat, stupid joke." Her laughter, her angel's laughter, exploded against the smoke, breaking it into wisps. Beyond them was an expanse of stars so immense that she couldn't take it all in. It was as if she hung in the centre of a vast, hollow planet whose crust was speckled with diamonds. There were millions of them. Billions. All different colours, all so far away. She spun, mesmerised, terrified, thinking, which one's mine? Oh God, which one is it? Even with her angel's eyes, the stars all looked the same. She could fly to any one of them with just a thought, but it would take her the rest of time to find her way home. She was going to die out here, but she didn't have to die alone. She folded her wings around herself, letting the memories pour through her like daylight. The angel lapped them up, feeding on them, growing stronger, its fire so bright that she felt she had to take a step back inside her own head. It wanted more, she understood. She thought back, searching for them. The time Chloe's chair broke beneath her in English one day and she'd pretty much rolled right out of the door. Daisy had almost weed herself through laughing so much. Despite the fear, she laughed. Her angel laughed, the sound of it blasting away the last of the smoke. This time even the vacuum of space permitted it, the sound echoing in her ears. It had never heard laughter. All the way out here there was only absence. There had only ever been absence, infinite and unbearable. This place, the emptiness between the stars, was what he liked, the man in the storm. He wanted to wipe everything else away, so this would be all that was left. Well, she wouldn't let him. She wouldn't. She would fill it all up with laughter. Fursville this time, riding the horses of the carousel with Adam and Jade, then playing tag, chasing each other over the sun-drenched ground. Brick's gangly legs slipping on the gravel, his giggles high-pitched and surprising. The fury hadn't mattered. Nothing had mattered. Right then, in spite of everything, she'd been happy. She laughed. The angel blazed, swept up by the wonder of it all. It emanated a silent chime that cut across the void, which found an echo in the other angels, a call that led the way home. Daisy stretched her wings, tuned in, burned out. Brick, the thermosphere, 4:27 p.m. Brick swam against a current that was way too strong for him, his arms and legs useless against the flow of air. He was still burning, but he didn't have the energy to transport himself. Rilke had done her best to kill him, and she must have come close. Everything ached. Everything felt wrong. His angel had taken the brunt of it, and now it was running on fumes. The storm raged around him, sucking him into its throat, back towards the hole at the end of the world. Pieces of planet floated past, breaking up as they went, and through the debris he caught glimpses of her, Rilke, burning as bright as the sun but refusing to fight. He didn't understand what she was doing. It was as though she'd given up. If she wanted, she could pull them both out of here. She was injured, yes, but only her human body. Her angel was still running at full strength. "Rilke!" he called again for what must have been the 100th time. "Please don't do this!" The storm shook, those same ear-pounding artillery shells detonating somewhere outside. There was something else now as well, something that roared even louder than the hurricane. Whatever it was, it had to be working because the clouds were spinning more slowly, the current weaker. Not weak enough. He slid down the gullet of the beast, unable to find purchase. It was going to swallow him whole into the empty infinity of its stomach. The thought of it, an eternity of nothing, an eternity alone, made him howl, the noise coming as much from his angel as from him. He didn't want to die alone. He'd been by himself for so long, not letting anybody in, not even Lisa. His anger had always filled him up. He'd never made room for anything else. "Rilke, wait!" he called to her. If she heard him, she made no sign of it, floating downstream in her web of fire. He scrabbled in mid-air, feeling like a parachutist in freefall. Beating the current was one thing, but crossing it was another. She was slightly ahead of him, and he wheeled his arms and legs, steering closer. "Hold on, for Christ's sake!" Maybe 10 metres, then 5. The air between them began to spark, as though somebody was letting off firecrackers. Invisible fingers pushed him back, and he thought it might be her trying to shunt him away. She was smiling, though, like she was in the middle of a waking dream. "Rilke," he said, using the last of his strength to push himself towards her. Bolts of energy fizzled up his arm as he grabbed her foot. He climbed her like a ladder, too frightened to let go. Just like before, when they'd been fighting, the hum of their hearts rose in pitch, sounding as if they were about to blow up. He hugged her, just grateful to have somebody next to him as he spun towards the end. "What do you want?" Rilke asked, staring blindly from the shell of her body. What was he supposed to say? That he didn't want to be on his own when the beast devoured him? He didn't reply. He just clung on. It couldn't be much longer now. The event horizon dead ahead, clouds of matter spiralling around it as they were crushed into dust and sucked inside. Even sound was being pulled in, leaving nothing but silence. "It's not too late," he said, his voice impossibly loud against the quiet. "You can get us out of here." "I'm tired," she replied. "I just want to go home. I want to see Schiller." The storm rocked again, pieces of it crumbling away as the attack continued outside. He clung to Rilke with trembling arms, feeling the pressure build between them. He couldn't hold on for much longer, but he didn't need to. In seconds he would simply disintegrate. It would be as if he never existed. "We don't want you here," Rilke said. Finally her eyes turned to him, 2 pools of molten lead and a third in the middle of her forehead, the one he'd made. She lifted her arms and pushed him, but he held on as best he could. "It's just me and my brother," she said. "Go away." "No," he said. "Go away!" She shunted him hard, almost slipping out of his hands. They were deep into the deafening silence now, sliding towards the black hole. Rilke was already coming apart, pieces of her crumbling loose as though she was made of sand. Her angel blazed, trying to hold her together. Brick pulled her close again, his terror so intense that it didn't register at all. The air between them pulsed, spitting liquid fire, but he fought it. He would not let go. He would not face the end by himself. A blinding flash, and suddenly he was inside a room, a library, watching motes of dust drift lazily between the shelves. Schiller sat on a window seat opposite him, his breath misting up the glass. There was nothing out there but gold, as if the room floated in an ocean of sunshine. Brick was crying, but he understood that these weren't his tears. They belonged to someone else, to Rilke. "He's gone," said Schiller, turning to Rilke, to Brick. "I won't let him hurt you again, I promise." "I know, little brother, I know," he heard himself say. "We'll keep each other safe forever. I love you." Schiller leant forward and hugged him, and the memory, was that what it had been? Faded. It had been so real that Brick had almost forgotten about the man in the storm, about the black hole at the bottom of its throat. He looked at Rilke, seeing her life as if it had been his own. Her dad long gone, her mum insane, and the bad man who said he was a doctor. His face loomed up, his breath stinking of coffee and alcohol, his nails long and dirty. Brick almost screamed, forcing the memory away, the pain that came with it. He scrabbled, trying to keep hold of Rilke, knowing that she needed him as much as he needed her. "I don't," she said. "I have Schiller. I'll always have him." "But he's not in there," Brick said, both of them dissolving in the dark light of the black hole. "There's nothing in there. It's empty. Schiller's gone." Their eyes met, and he realised that deep down, past the madness, past the exhaustion, she knew the truth. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I'll find him." She smiled, her lips bursting into ash. Brick felt his fingers slip as her body fell apart, tried to scoop her up in his hands, to hold her together. As soon as they parted, the air between them ignited, the same nuclear detonation as before, blowing him back up the throat of the beast. He rolled like a spinning top, pushed on by a rippling wave of energy. He called Rilke's name, reaching back for her with his hands, with his mind, trying to pull her along with him. But it was too late. She was gone. Nearly cried then. Poor Rilke. Cal, the thermosphere, 4:29 p.m. He spat fire and the storm burned. The beast was coming apart, its body blown to smoke, just its mouth hanging above the ground, still open wide. Even that was losing power, its inward breath nothing more than a whistle. Clumps of half-eaten debris were falling from it, along with flickering strands of dark light. It was almost as if the man in the storm was turning himself inside out. Adam hung in the air like a dragon, the same unbroken plume of fire roaring from his lips. Howie, too, hurling bolts of magma from his mouth. Each one made the sky shiver. Cal never stopped thinking about Daisy, the sadness and anger fueling the inferno inside him. He would never stop thinking about her. "That's very sweet," said a voice. Her voice. The shock of it cut off his angel's burning cry, and Cal looked out into the heavens. One of the stars was moving, falling towards Earth. It was emanating a sound, and it took him a moment to understand it was laughter. Daisy? How? "I don't know," she said, flickering out of sight before reappearing next to him in a halo of incandescent ash. He stared at her, open-mouthed, and she laughed even harder. "You'll catch flies if you keep your mouth open like that." Then she threw herself into his arms, the air between them blistering in protest. He grinned, holding her as tight as he was able. The relief was like a river bursting in his soul. "Use it," she said, pulling loose, looking up at the beast. "What?" "That," she said, pointing at his chest. "Use it." He did, laughing out a bolt of fire that lashed up into the fading darkness of the storm. Daisy was doing the same, the sound of her giggles like birdsong. Adam had stopped for breath, and when he saw Daisy, he too started to laugh. Not just him, but his angel too. Each burst of sound was a weapon, tearing into the void over their heads. The man in the storm... So bright. The man in the storm was trying to burn himself away, but his wings were in tatters. The stumps twitched like an injured crow's, lightning rippling over the surface. The air was full of movement, a hail of black feathers drifting down. He was no longer making any sound at all, just the pitiful wheeze of a dying thing, a last, desperate breath. A pearl of white light appeared in the heart of the darkness, hanging there for a moment like a dewdrop. It expanded in a heartbeat, a silent supernova. Cal buried his head in his arm, and when he looked again, the beast was lost in fire. A lone figure hurtled from the cold inferno, spinning through the air like a burning ragdoll. "Brick," he said. But Daisy was already chasing him, snapping out of existence with a pop, appearing again almost instantly with the other boy in her arms. He was alive, but only just, his angel's fire stripped away from every part of him except his eyes. He had lost his wings, one gone completely and the other like a scarf of candlelight that hung from his shoulder. "You're okay, mate?" Cal asked. "Rilke," he said. Cal searched for her in his head, but she was nowhere. He glanced at Daisy, met her eyes, and she knew it too. Rilke was gone, but she'd taken half of the storm with her. "Come on," said Cal. There was barely anything left of him. His mind and body emptied, but there was enough. He flexed his wings, carrying himself up towards the storm. The clouds were dissipating now, like rats deserting a sinking ship. Behind them was a scarecrow of old flesh, his throat an open wound that blazed black light. It was done. It was dead. It was over. "Let's finish this," he said. The fury. The thermosphere. 4:32 p.m. Cal fought it. He lashed out with every last piece of himself, every dreg of emotion. The angel did what it was supposed to, converting it into energy, into fire, hurling it at the beast. The man in the storm was now neither of those things. Everything about him had been ripped away, leaving just that spinning core, that black orb like an obsidian marble in the sky. Even this was shrinking, its dark light guttering out. Like the angels, it could not survive here on its own, Cal thought. Without its host, it was nothing. It pumped out waves of deafening silence, each one like an inverted scream. Cal no longer even felt like his body was his own. He felt clumsy inside it, as if he was operating an unfamiliar machine. It didn't matter, though. He felt the joy of it blister up his throat and burn from his mouth. None of it mattered anymore, because they'd beaten it. They'd won. Brick fought it, even though he couldn't hold his own weight. Daisy kept him afloat in the trembling air, her mind like a harness around him. He could barely see, his head a mess of white noise, but he knew what to do, sweeping his arms through the ether, somehow finding the energy to attack what was left of the storm. All he could think about was Rilke, the girl who'd killed Lisa, who had tried to kill him, the girl whose brother had been murdered, the girl whose mind he had ruined, whose sanity he had ripped right out of the hole in her head, the girl who'd been so sad, so angry, who'd refused to talk about it to anyone, not even her own brother. So much like Brick, so much like him. He couldn't make sense of her, of what had happened, but her rage was now his to use, and he did, screaming the beast into oblivion. "This is for you, Rilke. I'm sorry. I hope you find your brother. I really do. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." How he fought it. The fire inside him so natural that he wondered if it had always been this way, if he'd just woken from a dream of a normal life, a dream of a family by the sea, of friends, of nights on the beach drinking rum. How could any of that have been real? It felt so artificial, something he'd watched on TV. This was the truth. He was a creature of energy who could pull the world apart with just a word. The storm was now a quivering speck of shadow against the brilliant canvas of space. It flickered, poisonous roots of lightning growing from it, fading almost instantly. How he attacked it, stamping down with his mind as though he was crushing a beetle, again and again and again. The sound of it was like thunder. He never wanted to fall asleep, never wanted to go back to the dream life, to the place where he had no power. And his angel didn't want it either, he realised, because if it left him, then the only place it could go was somewhere dark and cold and timeless. He clung onto it, feeling its freezing fire flare up inside his soul, and laughing. Adam fought it, screaming at it, seeing his mother's face in the sky, his father's too. He was so angry with them. He hated them. All these years they told him to keep his mouth shut, to stay quiet, to stop moaning, stop crying. But not anymore. "I'm talking now," he yelled, and his voice was even louder than his mum's and dad's when they were shouting, louder even than the man in the storm. It was the loudest thing in the world, and it was his. "I'm talking, and there's nothing you can do." He wouldn't let them hurt him anymore. He wouldn't put up with it. He never wanted to see them again, and he didn't have to if he didn't want to. He'd live with Daisy and Cal and maybe even Brick, even though he was always grumpy. He looked at them now, glittering in the sun like Christmas tree ornaments. They were all made of fire, just like him. They were his brothers and his sister, and he loved them so much it made his heart hurt. They shouted at the sky, and he did too, all of them together, the way it would always be. Daisy fought it. It didn't feel like fighting, though, because all she was doing was laughing. It bubbled up inside her as if it had been buried for 1,000,000 years, finally set free. She couldn't stop it, even if she wanted to. Each giggle was a golden flame that swept from her mouth, reminding her of breaths on a cold day. They rose up to the man in the storm, landing on his nasty old skin, smothering him. Not that there was much left, anyway, just a circle of darkness, a giant hole punched in the sky. It was getting smaller and paler, the universe healing, She opened her wings and flew to it, still laughing at the relief of it. Her angel laughed too, the hum of a tuning fork making every cell in her body feel lighter than air. The storm shrank away from her, and she almost felt sorry for it, because it could never know what she was feeling. The beast, although it wasn't really a beast, it wasn't really alive like an animal or a person, roamed through the cold, dark emptiness of space, looking for life, because it couldn't stand it. All it knew was nothing, absence. To it, this world was wrong, a horrible blip in the rules, something that couldn't be tolerated, that had to be rebalanced, set right. But it hadn't counted on the angels, hadn't counted on the people either, and it certainly hadn't counted on laughter. If there was an exact opposite to the emptiness, to that infinite nothing it loved so much, it had to be laughter, didn't it? There was nothing more human. She fought it, reaching out, the storm now a speck of dust that she could trap between two fingers, then smaller than the little atoms that made up the air, then so small that even her angel's eyes could no longer make it out, tiny enough to fall between the cracks in the world. A single spark of black lightning flickered across the sky. Then she felt it end. Everything that it was erupting from it in a rippling explosion. The shockwave knocked her back, and she burned herself out of time and space, taking the others with her, riding the sound of their laughter all the way home. I think we probably will finish it today. Evening. The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. That's from Shakespeare's King Lear. Cal, Hemingway, 4:47 p.m. At first he wasn't sure where they were. Then the world caught up, wrapping its fist around them, and through the swirling halo of embers he recognised it. To his right was the sea, still unsettled even after all this time. To his left was a car park, and a little squat building with its doors boarded up. Ashes still coated the ground, fewer now, but enough for him to see the footprints there, the tyre tracks too from when they'd left that morning. It all looked so different through the eyes of his angel, but when he reached into his head to try and turn off the fire, nothing happened. Is it over? The voice was Brick's, and Cal looked around to see him lying on the ground, propped up against the dune. His fire still burned too, although weakly, and the boy shuffled uncomfortably in it. His big, bright eyes blinked. It better be, said Howie, floating above the ground beside the toilet block, his wings half folded. I am proper knackered. It is, I think, said Daisy. She and Adam stood side by side, their angels humming loud enough to lift the sand and ash in a dance around them. There was another noise coming from her, a crystal chime that made Cal's head feel weird. The man in the storm is dead, she said. You sure? Brick asked. Daisy cocked her head as if she was listening for something. After a moment or two, she nodded. I'm sure. Can't you feel it? He's gone. Cal could feel it. The sensation like he'd eaten something bad, something that had made him feel sick for days and days, and he'd finally puked it up. He wondered if his angel was relieved too, because it felt different up there. It was as if Cal was a hitchhiker inside his own skull, pushed to one side by the chill of the creature. He couldn't work out if the sensation was the result of an injury, something that had happened during the battle, but when he patted his head, his body, nothing seemed to be missing. I can't turn it off, said Brick. The bigger boy was writhing in the sand and ash, his single wing flopping beneath him like a mangled limb. It won't go away. Cal tried again, flicking that invisible switch that would put him back in control of his body. Nothing happened, and he felt the briefest glimmer of panic in his gut. The angel seemed to relish it, his second skin flaring up, pumping out that same mind-numbing sonic pulse. Keep calm, he told himself, but suddenly the suit of flames felt wrong, as though he was wearing somebody else's flesh. He didn't want to see through its eyes anymore, didn't want to see the secret mechanisms of the world, the little atomic engines that turned relentlessly. He didn't want to feel the immense gaping emptiness that waited just beyond the paper-thin shell of reality. He shrugged his shoulders, trying to shake himself free, but the angel sat right in the middle of his head, smothering his thoughts. What's going on? He said. Make it go away! Brick yelled, on his feet now, swiping at the air in front of his face as if he'd wandered into a swarm of bees. The boy's fear was contagious, Howie starting to scratch at the inferno around him, his wings cutting through the wall of the toilet block and blasting it into dust. Adam was whimpering, each cry making the air tremble as it spilled from his lips. Wait, it's okay, Daisy said. Don't be scared. Oh, piss off! Brick was screaming now, his words punching through the dunes, sending chunks of sand into the white foam of the sea. Just go away! We're done! We don't need you anymore! Brick! That's enough. Cal bit down on the rising panic, watching Daisy float through the air, pulling Brick into her arms. It was like watching a mother with a child, and he soon calmed down, even though the space between them kicked off a fireworks show of light. She let go of him, a thumping pulse of energy escaping, kicking up whirlwinds of dust. But I can't turn it off, Brick said, his hands clenching his temples. It won't get out of my head. She struggled for words. They don't want to go back to where they came from. It's cold there, and it's dark. They can't stay here, Brick said, punching himself now. It's my head, you hear me? Get out! That's enough, Daisy said, taking hold of his hand. The more emotional you get, the worse it will be. That's what they want, emotions, all that anger, they're feeding on it. You told us that's what we should do, he said, his burning eyes fixed on her. You told us to use them, it's your fault. Oh, lay off, mate, said Cal. If she hadn't told us that, we'd be dead, yeah? Give her a break. Oh, go to hell, Cal, Brick snarled back. I didn't ask for any of this to happen. He screwed his face up, groaning. I can feel it in there. Get out, get out, get out! Daisy looked at Cal, her face full of sadness. That chiming noise was gone, and the air felt heavier for it. They're so lonely up there, she said. They hate it. Can't they stay? If they stay, we die, he replied. It's the Fury days. As soon as anyone comes near us, they'll tear us into pieces. We can't hide forever. It's only a matter of time. He thought about the creature inside him, the thing that had kept him alive, and felt inexplicably guilty when he said, Tell them to leave, yeah? It's the only way. Can you do it? Daisy stared out across the sea, but she was looking at something else. Cal tried to peer into her thoughts, but what he felt there, a pressure on his chest, in his throat, was unbearable. Daisy, he said. She looked at him and smiled, just about the saddest smile he'd ever seen. I think I know what I have to do. Do you remember this bit? This bit's really sad. Daisy, Hemingway, 4:59 p.m. She wasn't sure why she'd brought them back here, to Hemingway. It was home, she guessed. The only one she'd ever had. The only one she had now. The only one she needed. It felt like centuries ago when she and Cal had driven into this car park, a lifetime ago when they'd driven out again. It felt as though she'd spent years here by the sea, in the sun, with Cal and Brick and Adam and the others. But years and seconds, minutes, hours, days, they were different now. Time was a broken thing. Home. She had been happy here. Not all the time, of course. She'd been sick and scared and angry too, at Rilke and Brick and all the ferals, and most of all at the man in the storm. But to have found even a little bit of happiness in the middle of all that was like when the sun breaks through the heaviest of clouds, painting the world gold. Yeah, she had been happy here. She would always be happy here. And they could be happy here too, the angels. Why did they have to go back to where they came from, just because their job was done? It wasn't as though they were machines ready to be stuffed back in the cupboard. She remembered thinking they were like robots, soulless weapons to be used in the war against the beast. But that was wrong. They were more like babies learning to use their emotions for the first time, discovering all the wonderful things that they could feel. They didn't have any of their own. She was pretty sure about that. But that didn't mean they couldn't feel what she was feeling. And who would want to go back to a horrid, dark, empty place forever if they could stay here and have laughter and love and all the nice things? Even as she thought it, she felt her angel laugh, that tuning fork ring filling the air, so unlike human laughter and yet so unmistakable. It made her giggle too. What do you mean? Cal asked. What do you have to do? She smiled at him again, looking at the angel that sat inside his soul. She still didn't truly understand what they were, or where they came from. How could she? These things were older than time, older than the universe. They'd been here forever, always existing. So had the man in the storm. He was the forever, the ageless, empty eons. It made her brain hurt just trying to think about it, so she stopped. None of it mattered. Not now they'd found a home. She was tired. The angels were tired. It was time to rest. She made her way to Brick, the boy squirming in his suit of fire. He was such a baby. "Brick," she said. He ignored her, his arms wheeling as if he could somehow pull himself out of his own body. "Brick," she said again, touching his shoulder. He flinched, glaring up at her. "Just get it out," he said. "I want you to listen to me," she replied. "I want you to be less angry and less selfish too." He started to argue, but there must have been something in her expression that stopped him. Everything is easier when you're nice, and it doesn't take much, does it? It doesn't cost anything. "What are you talking about?" he said. "It's got nothing to do with you, Daisy." "Just try," she said. "You think everyone hates you, but that's not true. Don't you see? We love you, Brick. We always will. Be nice. Promise me." His mouth dropped open and he nodded slowly. She giggled again. The laughter was so easy now for her and her angel. Then she moved her hand to his chest, pushing her fingers into the fire. It was like putting down a leaf in front of a ladybird, watching it crawl on. Brick's fire shot out with enough force to catapult him backwards, rolling him across the car park. It ebbed along her arm, making its way towards the sound of bells that rang from the very centre of her. She felt the moment where it joined her angel, the two of them sitting in her chest, chiming so hard her teeth rattled. Brick cried out, writhing on the sandy concrete where he'd landed, 30 metres or so away. He stared back at her with his own wide, wet, human eyes. "You're human now, remember?" she told him. "You can't come near me." He stood, but he stayed where he was. "What did you do?" he croaked, his words weak and stuttered, as though this was the first time he had spoken. Daisy turned to Howie, who backed away into the wreckage of the toilets. He held his hands up to her. "Wait, what if I want to keep mine?" he said. "It will kill you, sooner or later," she replied. "Then it will die too." "But what about you?" "I'm offering them something else, I think," she said, floating to him, reaching into his chest. "I wish I'd had time to get to know you." His angel came willingly, burning up her arm and into her soul. The force of it sent Howie spinning back almost to the tree line. After a second or two he lifted his head, putting his hands to his ears. It was no wonder. The hum emanating from her was deafening, 3 angel hearts beating in the same place. She felt so cold now, so heavy too, but she couldn't stop. She looked at Adam, smiled at him. "Are you ready?" she asked him. "But I want to stay with you," he replied, and it was so good to hear his voice. She floated to him, pulling him to her, feeling that same electric charge build up between them. "I'll always be here," she said. "I need you to be a brave boy, Adam. I need you to be strong. Promise me you'll never be afraid to use your voice again, okay?" She let him go, and he blinked up at her with his burning eyes. "Promise me." "I do. I promise." "This doesn't hurt." She pressed her fingers to his chest, his angel freeing itself faster than the others. It seared a trail along her skin, diving into her. It was like she'd eaten too much, like she was about to pop. The sudden current of energy swept Adam away, depositing him softly at Brick's feet. The bigger boy bent down, picked him up, holding him tight when he tried to run towards her again. She almost wasn't able to turn to face Cal, her body too heavy, too full of ice and fire. "How did you know it wouldn't kill you?" he asked. "How did you know any of this?" "I didn't," she replied, "but they did." "What happens now?" She shrugged. "We live." She straightened her arm, reaching for his chest, but he hovered away. "Thank you," he said. "We would never have made it without you." "I know," she said, giggling again. "Promise me you'll look after Adam. Never let him go." Cal looked over, smiled at the boy. "Sure, I'll try, Days, but I don't know what will happen." "Cal?" "Okay, sure, I promise. I'll never let him go." She tried again, but he backed away even more. "I don't know what else to say," he said. "Then don't say anything." She reached out a fourth time, her fingers pushing into his chest. There was a flash like an electric shock, a bolt of pure energy crackling into her body. Cal flew back, rolling through the dirt. When he looked up, his face was covered in ash. He looked like a ghost, and that just made her laugh even harder. The angels laughed too. Her body was hollow and filled with chimes. The hum coming off her sounded loud enough to split the earth. "Daisy?" somebody shouted, but she could barely hear them. She couldn't see very well either, the inferno blazing from her so brightly that even her angel's eyes were struggling. It was too much, the world trembling to hold her, the skin of reality stretching to fit her in. The angels were agitated. She could feel them inside her thoughts, her blood, her soul. It felt as if she was about to blow and take the whole universe with her. She blinked, seeing Cal and Brick and Adam through the haze, looking so small, so human. She remembered the first time she'd met them. Cal, when he'd saved her in the car, telling her about the grumpy lady like she'd never heard of a sat-nav before. Adam, when he'd arrived with the others, so quiet, so afraid until they'd ridden the horses of the carousel. Angie and Jeffrey and Wonky Butt the Wonder Horse, and his face had opened up like a flower. And Brick, poor, sad, angry Brick, who'd met them right here on this very spot, who'd taken them to Fursville, whose laughter was like a bird's when he'd finally forgotten to be mad at the world. How was it possible to love people so much, so hard? "You should go," she said. "I think something's about to happen." "Daisy, no, don't leave," said Adam. He started towards her, but Cal held him back. "Goodbye, Daisy," Cal said. He smiled at her. "It's not I'm going to cry. It's not such a bad way to leave," Daisy thought, looking at a smile. She offered him one back, turning away before her laughter could become tears. She'd see them again, she was sure of it. Maybe not in the same way as before, but that was okay. This wasn't the end. She drifted across the dunes, the world peeling open at her feet, the sea hissing as she flew over it. Even though she felt heavy, she rose like a balloon, heading up into the brilliant blue. The movement of the angels was growing more frenzied, as though they were cats trapped together in a basket. She hushed them, but they didn't understand. The thrum of their hearts was rising in pitch. How much longer did she have before the world simply couldn't hold her any more? Hours? Minutes? Seconds? But time is broken, she said to herself. It can never catch us. She turned back and looked down, saw the boys making their way into the leafless trees. Beneath her, the sea had been stripped away, the ground too, the energy that poured from her carving a crater in the earth. The air shook as it tried to escape, as if it knew what was coming. Time ground past, trying to snatch her up in its fingers, but she was too heavy for it now. It couldn't carry her. She held on until she couldn't see them anymore. Brick, the last one to go, raising a trembling hand, his tears like crystals on his dirty face as he disappeared. "Go," she told him. "Nothing bad will happen now." Then the universe broke beneath the weight of the angels. They seemed to burn up inside her, an explosion that started in her soul, expanding outwards. It got as far as the edge of the forest before she reached out with her mind and took hold of time, pulling herself free. Something groaned, the noise like a giant foghorn in the centre of the world. Everything was shaking, reality threatening to come to pieces, the explosion desperate to finish what it had started, but she wouldn't let go. The angels worked with her, holding on to the reins of time. In her head, she clung to that memory just as tightly, lying in her garden in the shade of the trees, watching beads of sunlight chase each other across the grass. She rested her head on her mum's leg, smelling linen and dewberry. Her dad waved at her from inside the kitchen window, looking 100 years younger than he had before, looking like himself again. She'd been so happy, so happy. And she would always be, because she never had to leave that garden. She never had to say goodbye. She would lie there with the breeze on her face, with her mum's hand on her arm, with her neighbour's cat weaving in and out of her feet, purring like a steam train, forever and ever and ever. Sorry. She laughed, and outside the world moved on without her. Slowly at first, she saw people there down below, crowds of them, but quickly speeding up. Day became night, became day, became night. The faces changed, but she saw people she knew, Cal and Brick and Adam, moving too fast for her to see what they were doing. There was rain and snow. The forest disappeared, replaced by buildings. Then they too vanished, the coastline changing with every beat of her heart. But still she saw them, her friends, her brothers, standing there by the sea, watching her for the blink of an eye. Every time they appeared, they seemed older, until they were grey and stooped, but she always knew them. The world went on without her, years passing, decades, centuries, and she watched the land recede, the ocean rise. She saw cities in the sky and rockets. She saw the sun grow big and red, all while that same laugh rang out of her, just a single breath that held all of time at bay. At some point she would have to let go, she knew, when the man in the storm appeared again, or something else like him. At some point the angels would pull their way free from her so that they could fight another battle. But until then, there was just the garden, and the sun, and her mum, and dad. I love you guys so, so much. And a laughter that pealed out across the ages. I'm such a wuss. Sorry, Daisy. Let's see if we can get through one more chapter. Brick. Daisy was probably one of my favourite ever characters, so that was a really hard chapter to write. It's not like a sad ending, it's just an ending. Brick, Hemingway, 5:23 p.m. Brick couldn't bear to leave her there alone, but what choice did he have? He could hear the sonic pulse of the angels inside her, growing all the time, as though she was about to explode. "We should go," said Cal, taking Adam by the hand and leading him away from the sea. The little kid resisted, trying to pull loose, but Cal was holding on to him. "Mate," he said to Brick, "seriously, that doesn't sound good." It didn't look good either. The world was coming apart around Daisy, the land and water boiling as she floated up into the sky. He could feel the tremble through his feet, the ground trying to shake itself to pieces. He could barely see the girl anymore through the orb of fire that surrounded her. She looked like a bird in a burning cage. "I don't want to go," said Adam, sobbing. "I want Daisy." "She's going to be fine," Cal said. "Can't you hear her?" Incredibly, she was still laughing. The sound crystal clear, rising even above the hum of the angels. Cal bent down, slinging the boy over his shoulder. He started to run towards the tree line, and Brick followed, that pulse chasing him, growling against his back. Howie had already vanished. Brick slipped on the ash, on the sandy concrete of the car park, so tired he could barely put one foot in front of the other. It felt as though he was learning how to use his body from scratch again, now that his angel was gone. He felt too light, too brittle, as if he might break into splinters at the slightest touch. But it was a miracle he was moving at all. His angel must have healed the most serious wounds. It had patched him up from the inside. He hobbled into the trees, looking back through the bare branches. Daisy hung over the sea, burning as brightly as the sun. The water steamed beneath her, freezing and then boiling again and again, forming statues of ice that lasted just seconds before melting away. It was mesmerising, and he almost forgot himself in the kaleidoscopic wonder of it. He held out a hand to her, realising that he was crying, and even though he no longer had his angel, he heard her voice in his head as if she was standing right next to him, whispering in his ear, "Go, nothing bad will happen now." He stepped between the trees, and the world behind him turned white and silent. A noiseless wave picked him up, carrying him through the air, so fast that he couldn't even scream. Then he fell onto the soft, sandy ground, and life went dark. He didn't know how much later it was when he opened his eyes. He lay there on his back, staring up at a sky that was halfway between day and night. His ears were ringing, as though he'd been at a concert all night, but beyond the annoying whine, he could hear voices. He tried to sit up, feeling like every fibre of his being was bruised. Even his eyeballs were sore, his vision watery. He tilted his head to the side, blinking away the tears. Something was moving over there. Maybe several somethings, he couldn't be sure. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, running his other hand across his eyes. When he looked again, the shapes had solidified into figures, people, one running in his direction. A bolt of adrenaline rocked through his exhausted body. The fury! "It's gone," he tried to tell them, his mouth refusing to form the words. "The angel, it's gone!" The shape thundered towards him and he clambered to his feet, managing one step before falling on his face. Were they screams he could hear? Choked, feral cries? After everything that had happened, after all he'd done to fight the man in the storm, was this how it was going to end? Teeth in his throat, fingernails in his eyes? He tried again, but there was nothing left inside him. Hands grabbed him, rolling him over, the black hole of a mouth dropping towards him. He prayed it would be quick. It was the very least he deserved. "Are you okay?" He almost couldn't hear the words over the whine in his ears. "Mate, can you hear me?" Brick lay still, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He blinked until the face above him came into focus. "Cal?" Brick grunted. The other boy grinned. I don't know why I did that Cal's voice in a different voice there. "Cal?" Brick grunted. The other boy grinned, looking bruised and tired, but otherwise intact. "You okay?" Cal said again. Why did he keep asking? It was pretty bloody obvious that he wasn't. Brick struggled to sit up, trying to recall how we'd got here. Everything in his head was white noise, but he remembered running with Cal and Adam, remembered Daisy floating out over the ocean. What had happened to her? Had she exploded? He grabbed hold of Cal's arm, hauling himself to his feet. "Daisy," he said. "Oh, please let her be okay. Please don't let her be dead." "She's right there," said Cal, pointing. Brick hung on to the other boy, the world spinning. He could have been standing in the middle of a desert, only the sand here was a million different colours, and dead ahead was the ocean, so foamy somebody could have poured 1,000 tons of detergent into it. The sun sat on the horizon, high over the water, but when Brick turned back around, it also hung over Cal's head. The impossibility of it made him reel. "You need to sit down," said Cal. Brick shrugged himself free, staggering across the beach towards the first sun, her sun. There were more people ahead, silhouetted by the glow. He had to get closer before his watering eyes could identify them as Adam and Howie. They were both filthy, their clothes in tatters, but their angels had looked after them well, repairing the worst wounds before jumping ship. They were smiling. "Hey," said Howie, his voice like sandpaper. "You look like crap." Brick laughed, even though it hurt to do so. Howie was black and blue, his hair silver. "You don't look so good yourself," he said. "You look like my granddad." "Well, he must be a very handsome man," said Howie, making Adam giggle. Brick looked back towards the sun. It was forged of light, of colours he'd never seen before, waves of energy shimmering back and forth over the surface. He couldn't see anything inside it, but a crystal chime emanated from the sphere, the sound unmistakable. "She's laughing," said Adam. "She's happy." "You think?" Brick said. But the kid was right. There was no doubt about it. How many times had he heard that laugh? Had it pulled him out of his anger, made him human again? "Daisy," he said. And the thought of her there, trapped inside that bubble of fire, made him angry. Why did it have to be her? She was just a little girl. It should have been someone else. She should have been allowed to go home to live her life. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't... He felt a hand on his shoulder. Looked to see Cal there. "You made her a promise," he said. Brick realised his fists were clenched, his nails digging into the flesh of his palms. He had promised her something. He'd promised not to be angry, but how the hell was he supposed to keep that? "Seriously, mate," said Cal, nodding out over the water. "You really want to risk her coming after you? She'll fry your ass." He laughed again, despite himself, letting his body relax. The truth was he was just too tired to be angry. The deep breath he took was full of the smell of the sea, the smell of home. He could try. For Daisy. She had saved them, after all, time and time again. He owed her that much. "Fine," he said. "You're looking at the new me, one chirpy arsehole coming right up." Cal laughed at him, and for a while they stood there, squinting into the brilliance of the second sun. It seemed impossible that less than a week ago he'd sat on this very beach, worrying about money, petrol, Lisa. How could so much change in such a small space of time? The thought of it made his legs shudder, and he almost fell, Cal's hands holding him up. "Hey!" The voice came from behind them, and they all spun around to see a man in a police uniform walking over the dunes. Brick took a step back, calculating the distance between them. 30 metres. Please don't, he thought. Please don't turn. The man, not a cop, a fireman, was running now, pointing up at the new sun. "What are you guys doing?" 25 metres. 20. The man stumbled, groaning. "Oh no, it can't be. 15 metres, and Brick had almost turned, almost started running, before the fireman found his feet again. "Oh, you kids need to get out of here," he said, running right past them, kicking up sand. "Go on, get home." Brick remembered to breathe, watching the fireman as he ran into the woods, yelling something into a radio. "Oh, thank you," he said to Daisy, to the angels, to anything else that was listening. "We should go," Cal said. "Go where?" Brick asked. "What are we supposed to do after that? Pretend it never happened? Pretend it might never happen again?" Cal shrugged. "The only thing I know is that I am desperate for a can of Dr. Pepper. Everything else can wait." "You know that stuff is poisonous," said Brick. "Nothing but sugar and chemicals." "I know," said Cal. He turned, walking up the beach, away from the sea. The others followed, each of them carrying 2 shadows from the 2 suns. "But if I can survive today, I can survive a can of fizz." Brick shook his head, then found that he was smiling, so hard that his cheeks ached. Cal was right. It didn't really matter what happened next. Right now they were safe. They'd survived. He glanced back towards Daisy, hidden inside her bubble of light. Was she watching him now? He raised his hand and waved to her. "Goodbye, Daisy," he said. "I'll see you soon. Be safe." Then he turned, running after the others, hearing her laughter fill the air behind him as he chased his shadow into the sun. Oh, and that's it. That is the end. Yeah. So, I hope you enjoyed that. It has a really bittersweet ending. It's always I think all my books have a slightly bittersweet ending. Maybe not The Devil's Engine, but Fury does. Obviously, because of Donovan and Simon. But this always felt just sadder. Little Daisy saving the world, and yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and sorry for crying. I just can't help myself. I do really love that character, and I was so sad when I realised that was the only way that at least some of them could get back to normal. Right, so what's next? We have to think of a new book to read. Part of me thinks I should read The Night Children, which was the kind of Escape from Furnace spin-off. It's just a short story. Part of me thinks I should read The Inventors, which was my first ever book. It's not horror, and it's for younger readers, but it's a bit of fun. Part of me feels I should read a book that I wrote and never did anything with, called Unicorns Are Evil, which is a nice antidote to the seriousness of the Fury, which is really heavy. And I definitely won't cry reading Unicorns Are Evil because it's not sad at all. It's just very funny. So I'll have a think, and if you have any suggestions, let me know. And but I'm sure we'll get through them all eventually. And yeah, but we'll definitely read something a bit more light-hearted and a bit easier going next. But thank you for joining me for this. It was 22. Was it 22 episodes or 23? I can't remember. So yeah, this is the 23rd episode. So 23 hours basically of the Fury. Thank you very much for joining me, and for keeping me company, and for just hanging out with me and Brick and Cal and Daisy and the others. And yeah, I'll see you very soon. Take care of yourselves. Have a lovely day, and thank you.